पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज के महाज
जंग के नाम। बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मैं हूं वजाहत सईद खान। Good morning, good afternoon and a very good evening to you wherever you may be. My name is Wajahat Saeed Khan. I'm an independent journalist based here in New York City, reporting on Pakistan, India, and the rest of South Asia. However, our story today is on the Middle East, where Israel has created a new precedent by attacking Iran with over 200 fighter jets in pre-dawn strikes across that country, hitting at least 6 sites: Tehran, Natanz, Tabriz, Isfahan, Arak and Kermanshah. अब जो assault जो हुआ है उसने न्यूक्लियर फैसिलिटीज की, ईरान की न्यूक्लियर फैसिलिटीज को, मिसाइल स्टॉक पाइल्स को टारगेट किया है. बट दैट्स नॉट जस्ट इट. द इरानियन leadership, strategic leadership, has also been decapitated partially. This is Israel's largest air campaign in its long history versus the Iranians, and the Iranian list of casualties reads like the obituary of the power structure of the regime of that country. IRGC, जो Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps है, उसके चीफ हुसैन सलामी साहब को मार दिया गया है. General Mohammad Bagheri has been killed. Nuclear scientists Farayuddin Abbasi and Mohammad Mehdi Tehranchi are among the dead. Casualties जो हैं वो 70 से ज़्यादा लोग मारे गए हैं, 320 से ज़्यादा लोग जख्मी हुए हैं. This was not a random escalation. It was a calculated decapitation. ईरान had just bragged, अभी ईरान ने कहा था कि उसके पास बहुत सारे सेंसिटिव इजरायली डॉक्यूमेंट्स आ गए हैं अमेरिका के साथ, इजराइल के जो ताल्लुकात हैं उसके बारे में, न्यूक्लियर प्रोजेक्ट्स के बारे में. और इजराइलियों ने भी पहले थ्रेट किया हुआ था कि जो हेड ऑफ द स्नेक है, सांप का जो सर है, वो हम उसकी तरफ जा रहे हैं. इसलिए गजा के बाद लेबनान, लेबनान के बाद सीरिया, अपना हमास के बाद हिजबुल्ला, सबको करते करते ये इन्होंने पहले किया था. अब Iran has basically done a declaration of war. उन्होंने अपनी तरफ से तो डिक्लेयर कर दिया है कि ये डन है, हमारी तरफ से जंग शुरू है, मगर ये जंग ईरान की तरफ से नजर नहीं आ रही. अभी तक ईरान ने स्ट्राइक्स लिए हैं, किए नहीं है. ईरान का पर्सपेक्टिव क्या है, पाकिस्तान का इसमें क्या रोल है, अगर कोई है, और डेफिनेटली है, बिकॉज पाकिस्तान का 1200 किलोमीटर लंबा बॉर्डर लगता है. हिंदुस्तान जो इजराइल से बहुत कनेक्टेड है, वो क्या कर रहा है. वॉशिंगटन, जिधर हमारा आर्मी चीफ फील्ड मार्शल आसिम मुनीर आया हुआ है, वो क्या कर रहा है. दीज आर ऑल स्पाइरलिंग, फ्लूइड, रियल टाइम क्वेश्चंस. अमेरिका का क्या रोल है, और बहुत जबरदस्त रोल है, बिकॉज अमेरिका ने वो सलाहियत, वो इंटेलिजेंस, वो असलहा, वो जहाज, वो गोला बारूद इजराइल को दिया है, जिससे उसने ये अटैक किया है. इजरायलीज क्या कर रहे हैं, दैट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. ईरान के क्या ऑप्शंस हैं, ये, और फिर पाकिस्तान, और फिर इंडिया, इन दोनों का क्या रोल है. ये रियल टाइम की जो स्टोरी है, इसमें आज हमारा महाज जो है डीप डाइव करता है. 2 टॉप एक्सपर्ट्स से हम बात करते हैं. कामरान बुखारी ऑफ द न्यू लाइन्स इंस्टीट्यूट एंड सहर खान, formerly of the Cato Institute and the Stimson Center. Non-proliferation, counter-terrorism, geopolitics के ये दोनों पाकिस्तानी निजात अमरीकी जो हैं, ये दोनों एक्सपर्ट्स हैं, एंड इनका पर्सपेक्टिव वाइटल है, क्योंकि ये बैलेंस करके हमें बताते हैं सिर्फ ईरान में जो नहीं हो रहा, जो हो रहा है सिर्फ उसके बारे में नहीं, बट ओवरऑल खित्ते में क्या हो सकता है. ये है आज के महाज. प्लीज शेयर, लाइक, सब्सक्राइब, कमेंट. दिस इज अ क्रिटिकल ब्रेकिंग स्टोरी. विल बी कवरिंग इट over the next few hours, over the next few days as it develops. But for now, share, like, subscribe, comment, watch the rest of the show. There is a huge war underway. Things are going to be very hot this summer. Stay with me. Now, to cover all of this, it was something which was supposed to be happening. The all sorts of elements in Washington had been talking about how it was going to happen, but it's finally here. And someone who had been predicting it for a while, someone who's been covering it for a while and has a great tendency to see these things coming, is my friend and colleague, Kaman Bkari of the New Lines Institute in Washington, D.C. Kamran, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Wajahat. Great to be back.
Okay, now I'm going to throw back to a great piece in the journal you wrote about almost 5 years ago. That was at the beginning of the Biden administration, when the Iranians had just lost a top nuclear scientist to an assassination. Not the only one, a series of assassinations that had slowly been getting to the head of the snake, as the Israeli prime minister calls it. But we sort of saw this coming, right? There's all sorts of red flags, whether it was the Americans pulling out their personnel from regional offices, or whether it was the Israelis doing what they've been doing, first in Gaza, then in Lebanon, Syria, through the proxies, all the way here. Why have the Iranians been sleeping on the wheel, Kamran? What's your take on that?
In simple terms, Wajahat, look, they invested far more in developing the capabilities of their non-state actor proxies than their own conventional military capabilities. The underlying assumption was that, look, we're too far off, and as long as Israel is tied down by these proxies, the home front is safe, and they don't need to invest too much there. There isn't a state actor threat other than Israel. And then, we have a complex relationship with the neighbors, the Turks, the Arab states. We also have a relationship that has been really, really adversarial, but managed with the United States. And the United States, it's not in the U.S. interest to allow Israel to go and too far in waging war, at least beyond it. Geography matters even today, but technology has shrunk that sort of geographic distance. So the Iranians sort of took comfort from the fact that we're too far off. There are too many stakeholders. This is not going to happen. So they didn't prepare. They didn't have air defenses. I mean, just look at the compare and contrast between the Pakistani performance in the 87-hour war with India not too long ago, just last month, and look at how the Iranians, the Israelis are literally striking at will without any resistance. Now, we could see some retaliatory strikes by drones and missiles, but that's not the same as being able to prevent an adversary from coming in and striking on your soil.
At will. That's key. So you touched upon this, Kamran, but let's expand on this. Do you see a similarity or a difference or a parallel, at least, between the Pakistani Indian conflict and the Israeli-Iranian conflict? Because there are some of our friends on the Indian side who are drawing those parallels on Twitter. In fact, they're saying, "Oh, Pakistan should be careful because we almost did this to Pakistan, and thank God it asked for the ceasefire." And a lot of that is chest-thumping rhetoric. But to be fair, there are remarkable differences. Let's list them out on how the Pakistanis responded, reacted, and retaliated versus how the Iranians are doing it, or rather not doing it today.
Look, Pakistan, despite its troubled past and its sort of status as having supported non-state actors, as a supporter of, let's just call them, jihadists, whether in Afghanistan or India, it still isn't the pariah that Iran is. So if you're a pariah, which means nobody's going to do a whole lot of business with you, that means there are things you can't acquire. Despite the fact that Pakistan had always had this sort of troubled relationship with the United States for the longest time, but yet Pakistan still had a relationship in which it was the recipient of hardware. And of course, the Pakistani officers and commanders would go and continue to go to the United States and engage in those exchange programs and learn the tradecraft and share experiences. Add in the now greater dependency on China and the exchange there. We saw Chinese hardware being utilized by the Pakistanis and quite effectively in the 87-hour war, or at least in the early hours of the 87-hour war. So there's that marked difference. Pakistan isn't sort of an isolated state. It isn't. It's has a long military tradition. The military dominates the state. The intelligence services dominate the state. Pakistan has made some serious mistakes, for which its people have paid dearly with the support for these jihadist proxies. That vector of jihad turned inward, back in the 2000s, post 9/11, and Pakistan has suffered because of that immensely. But nonetheless, the Iranians are in a league of their own. I mean, they're isolated. They don't have too many friends. And they decided to put everything and the kitchen sink into this proxy project.
So what I'm hearing is there are parallels. Let's talk about both Pakistan versus Iran. Pakistan invested in proxies, jihadists, as you call them. So did the Iranians. Pakistan did very terrible, naughty things with those proxies in the region. So did the Iranians. Pakistan got a bad reputation for doing those terrible, naughty things with those jihadists. So did the Iranians. But the IRGC versus the Pakistan Army are two completely different animals. The Pakistan Army's Western, professional, even technocratic leanings have still looped it into the global military supply chain. It has friends and allies across different regions. Of course, an over-dependency on China, but that's a whole other story, versus the Iranians who are isolated. So what you're really saying, Kamran, is that this is the difference between the two military regimes, the Pakistani military being a little more westernized, being a little more with it, being a little more connected, and being a little more technologically savvy, for example, which it proved in its recent conflict in India, versus these guys who have an over-reliance on their jihadist friends. And that's about it. They haven't invested in the right tech. Are you saying there's a tech difference here, or is there another difference here between these two militaries?
I mean, it's historical, it's cultural, it's a trajectory issue. Iran went from being a pro-Western country, it was a monarchy, and the revolution completely changed that. The last 46 years have shown that Iran turned into something completely different. It was, look, by the very fact that A, it's not Arab, B, it's not Sunni, that already sort of isolates Iran in its strategic environs, especially with the Sunni Arab dominated Middle East. Pakistan does not face that kind of a problem. Pakistan, is not, the other, if you will, ethnically or from a religious point of view. Second of all, Pakistan, despite everything that has happened, is still a modern polity. It did not go through a revolution. Yes, there's military domination of the state, the intelligence domination, security establishment domination of the state, but there is a thick coating of democracy in that country. Mm-hmm. There is that thick layer of democracy and democratization that you just cannot dispense with. Iran is not like that. It's an ideological state. It tried to borrow parliamentary, republicanism from the West and, the idea of elections and so on and so forth. But Iran is a completely different political animal than Pakistan. So that alone accounts for different behavior. The Iranians made it a point to be anti-Western. They went out of their way to be anti-Western. There are elements of people in Pakistan who are anti-Western, but anti-Westernism and anti-Americanism was not at that scale.
It's marginal. It's marginal.
And so there are these very clear differences.
Okay, last bit, and I know it's early days in the conflict, and you're on the clock, but game this out for us from 4 perspectives real quickly. The Washingtonian perspective, where you are right now. What's Trump and his MAGA base? Where do they stand? What are the Israelis' next moves, potentially, considering they have it's fair skies, it's open skies for them? Are the Iranians now in the throes of a partial regime change? Literally, they've lost the top guard. What do they do next? And finally, critically, spillover into South Asia. Possible spillover across the border into South Asia, which is still hot post Operation Sindoor, India versus Pakistan.
So great questions, very quickly. So look, from the president's point of view, here in the United States. President Trump has not sort of kept any secret. He's openly said, look, you weren't cutting a deal and you left me no choice. So now I hope that, with the damage that's been done, you want to limit the damage and you'll come to the table and we can cut a deal. So that's the American perspective. The Israeli perspective is that there are two levels of that. One is, will this lead to buying a great amount of time before Iran can, stage a comeback when it comes to the pursuit of nuclear weapons? Number two is that, can this all somehow metastasize into a, regime evolution that's been going on, internally anyway? Remains to be seen. I think that that's the Israeli perspective. From the Iranian point of view, there are two things. One is that you want to limit the amount of damage that the Israelis are going to do. You want to also you want to strike back, because you lose all credibility whatsoever. And that will, if nothing else, undermines the regime, that will. So, but you can't go too far. So you're going to have to do some form of retaliation, but at the same time telegraph to the other side and through the Americans that, look, I don't want escalation. You struck me, I struck you. Let's go to the table. In the meantime, they need to be able to maintain their own and hold on to power. And they're approaching a transition. Look, Khamenei is 85 years old. And this isn't what he was planning, in his, in the twilight years of his life. He's basically far more than the founder of the republic, Ayatollah Khomeini. It was Khamenei who basically built this entire regime over the last 35, 36 years. So he needs to be able to pass the baton. Those who are going to receive the baton have to be able to get it and get to that other side without much of an earthquake than we are already seeing. So there's that. Now, as far as spillover in South Asia, well, look, if there is a regime crisis, to say the least, in Iran, that has implications for Afghanistan. And that has implications for Pakistan's Balochistan province as well, and the broader, western flank of Pakistan. Obviously, this comes right on the heels of the 87 war, our war with India. So India is looking at this and saying, what are the lessons we can draw? Pakistan is looking at this and saying, what are the lessons that we can draw? So there's a lot to be said, and we're running out of time.
Right. Well, Kamran, thank you. We will get back to you hopefully soon. I know there's a lot developing. It's early days. It's the early hours of the conflict. But keep watching this space for us, man. And keep us posted. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, now let's pivot to Washington to get a wider perspective on this, a bigger perspective, clearly larger than mine and more nuanced than mine. And for that, I bring in my colleague and friend, Sahar Khan. She is a non-proliferation expert, formerly with the Cato Institute and the Stimson Center, watches this space closely, watches nuclear programs closely, watches India and Pakistan closely, and is going to weigh in for us on what this means. Sahar, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so real quickly, beyond the tactical details of what the Israelis have done, frankly, if you look at the list of assassinations and hits targeting Iranian leadership, this doesn't just seem to be about nuclear weapons, at least to me. This could be a larger cause, a cause of regime change. Now, I know that's a loaded word in Washington. It's also a loaded word in Adiala, but that's a whole other regime change. We're not talking about that one. Let's keep this to the Israelis. Are they pushing for this batch of leadership to just go away so that another batch comes up? What's going on here?
Yes, I mean, I think that's a great point, and absolutely, I think they are. And I think one thing to realize is that this is something that's been in the making for at least the past 2 decades. The US and Israel have been doing all kinds of joint military exercises. 2 years ago, they had one in the United States called Juniper Oak, which was one of the more extensive exercises they had done publicly. And there was a lot of information about that as well. And so, Israelis have been waiting for this moment, and they finally have this moment where they are militarily capable of doing these military strikes, and they did. They've been really targeted. And I think in Israel's view, it's not simply about Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. It's also about the regime that wants these nuclear weapons and have put Iran on this path. And so that's why they've targeted them. And I think in their view, if they take out this current regime, then whoever replaces them, whenever they do, will be a regime or a government that doesn't want Iran to be a nuclear weapon state. Um, Whether or not that's going to be true or not, I think it depends on how this crisis unfolds in the next few days. But this has been a long time coming. And the thing that was a red flag for me was when actually the US withdrew its diplomats. And
Hmm.
that's when I said, there's something else is going on.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, and that's why, and we've kind of seen this come out as well, right? Where the Trump administration, President Trump has openly said, yes, I knew that these strikes were happening. And so I definitely think that this is something that they've planned. And like the core goal is not simply getting rid of Iran's nuclear capabilities or damaging them to a huge extent, but I think it's about regime change.
So, if it is about that, and the Israelis have been quite clear, they keep on referring to the head of the snake, and it's if you if you pan out, if you zoom out from Tel Aviv, we've sort of seen what they've been doing first in Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, Hezbollah. This was expected, as you said. This is 2 decades in the making. They didn't just come up with this last weekend. So, premised on that. The other question which I must ask is, what were the Iranians doing sleeping on the wheel? Weren't they expecting this? The Americans pulling out their personnel from regional embassies? Doesn't that wasn't that a red flag for them if it was a red flag for you?
I mean, look, it must have been. I follow Iran, but not as closely as I do Pakistan and India. But look, I will say this. Iran has come to the negotiating table. I mean, they made a deal with the Obama administration, the JCPOA or the Iran nuclear deal, and they were abiding by that, and they would allow IAEA inspectors to come in, and so they were on board with negotiations. And Iran has very openly said that it wants to negotiate. It was the first Trump administration that pulled out of the JCPOA. So from Iran's perspective, I mean, come to the negotiating table, but also prepare yourself for the inevitable, right? And this inevitable has been coming. Um, you know, red things are moving really quickly. And I think what will be really interesting to watch is like exactly how Iran can defend itself. I mean, I know that it launched drones and Jordan intercepted them. So we'll have to see how well Iran's air defenses work, whether or not they can actually defend their nuclear sites, the ones that are remaining or not. Um, and I do think at the end of the day, like this is Israel crossing Iran's red lines. And I think the thing that I'm really interested in watching is like the spillover effects of this, right?
Yeah.
Sitting in Washington, it's always been kind of frustrating and infuriating to me, like how we end up dividing our regional expertise, right? This is the Middle East conflict.
Yeah.
And if you're a South Asia analyst, then you're watching it on the side. But the reality is Iran and Pakistan are neighbors, and Pakistan and India are neighbors, and India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons, and they just had a conflict in May. So, yeah, I mean, I think there'll be great spillover effects if Israel is actually successful in, damaging Iran's nuclear program and getting rid of the regime, then it will have massive implications for South Asia. And I think this is just something we'll have to watch in the next few days, but I'm certainly worried and watching it very closely.
So I know it's early days in this Middle East conflict, but as you said, the lines are blurry. There's 1,200 kilometer long border with Iran. I know both hinterlands connect, Pakistan's Balochistan with Iran's Sistan. But they've had a weird, muddy relationship over the last few decades as well. Last year, they exchanged missiles, and not in a good way, against each other over that Balochistan border. The Pakistani military chief happens to be in your neighborhood these days. He's around town. This reminds me of that Imran Khan meeting Putin moment back in 2021-22. But coming back to all of this, give me, and with the premise that I know it's early days and I'm putting you in a position, but war game. Game this out for me. What are
Mhm.
the top 2 or 3 implications for Pakistan regarding it's considering its lukewarm relationship with the Iranians, considering how the military is trying to get closer and get American largesse and attention again, and of course the whole Saudi connection, the whole UAE connection, which in a way has been a slow drawbridge to normalizing ties potentially with the Israelis.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, no, I think that's a great question. Look, war changes dynamics as well. Of course, what happened in April of last year between Iran and Pakistan was unfortunate, but it was really quick and it de-escalated really, really quickly as well. I think in this instance, Pakistan doesn't have a relationship with Israel. So it's easy then to pick a side, which would be Iran. But I also think Pakistan has to be extremely careful. I mean, the Pakistani delegation was just here last week, and they came with the message of peace, and it was led by Bilal Bhutto, and he had a really impressive delegation with him. They were all kind of advocating for peace, trying to give this image of Pakistan as a responsible actor in the region, a restraint-oriented actor in the region, and not someone that wants to fight any wars with India, wants to negotiate with India. And so, if Pakistan wants to keep that conversation going, then I think that it potentially has to advocate for negotiations between Iran and the US and potentially Israel as well. But I think, more importantly, what I find the most troubling, right, is the world that we're living in is basically a world in which Israel can do whatever it wants. International law, international institutions don't really matter to Israel. And I think that this should be a red flag for the United States as well. Now, the Trump administration, President Trump specifically, has gone on when he campaigned this time around, and even last time when he campaigned, he is known as an anti-war president, right? He is the one who says, I want to end America's forever wars. And yes, just because you don't have boots on the ground doesn't mean that the US is not involved in any way. So
Yeah.
I think after this conflict, at least domestically, President Trump will sort of have to figure out the inconsistencies in his message with his base. For Pakistan, I think this is a really good moment to highlight how dangerous it is to fight these kinds of wars in a nuclear environment. India and Pakistan, for the most part, and I know that we're sort of still doing the postmortem on what happened a few weeks ago, but India and Pakistan, I think both sides are really grateful for the ceasefire, so they can take a sit back and sort of assess their own capabilities and what this actually means for strategic stability in the region. How Iran plays out will have an impact on how Pakistan thinks about its nuclear responses and thinks about its confidence building measures, not simply with India, but also regionally. So I
Hmm.
do think this is a really dangerous time. And I'm not sure about the implications. Like you say, it's early days, but it is a cause for concern.
So that takes me further east to India. Now, the Indian Prime Minister has just said that he's in touch with Bibi. Netanyahu's called him. This is rare. Being on a call, reporting it, tweeting it out, saying, "Oh, I'm talking to Netanyahu," sort of shows that the Indians are also at least acting diplomatically, saying that they're in the room as well. They're on the table as well. This, you know, feeds into the whole India being the voice of the global South image that they try to put up. But the Indians do have a very warm relationship with the Israelis versus the Pakistanis, completely different dynamic. Now, keep that in one pocket. And on the other side, the Indian strategic community, people who work for the ORF, people like Sushant Sareen, which is the ORF is India's one of India's larger think tanks. They're going on and saying that, oh, Israel, Pakistan should be careful because we almost did what Israel did to Pakistan. Sorry about that. They're saying that the Sushant Sareens of the world are saying that Pakistan needs to be careful because we could have done to Pakistan what the Israelis just did to the Iranians. Now, I know that's a lot of false equivalency there, but they're trying to draw strategic parallels and parity that we're trying to we could have defanged Pakistan as well. So this comparison of a nuclear Pakistan with a wannabe nuclear Iran, one versus India, one versus Israel, I'm a little concerned about this, and I'm intrigued as well. What's your take on what the Indian game here is right now?
So in terms of India, look, I don't think it's that uncommon actually for Prime Minister Modi to say that, Netanyahu called him and tweeted it out. I mean, India and Israel have a relationship, and India has bought many, many drones from Israel, and so they're defense partners to some extent, or whatever label you want to put on them. So I don't think it's frankly that odd that Prime Minister Modi tweeted that out. And also, in general, India has certainly it is a very sort of it is a leading voice in the global south, and I think India's sort of rise as a regional voice has been to be we are a mediator between really, really tricky flashpoints. So none of that really surprises me. As far as the sort of strategic community point, I mean, look, everybody has a hot take. So I think it's a little too early to draw parodies, right? And I think a lot of this sort of chest thumping I find really distasteful. Um, Personally, like I would love a world without nuclear weapons, which of course is obviously not happening anytime soon. But I do think it's a little strategic laziness to be like, India could have done this to Pakistan and Pakistan should be careful and blah blah blah. To me, this kind of rhetoric should be ignored, and frankly, doesn't really matter. Because India and Pakistan did fight for 4 days and there was a ceasefire. And it was a really, really serious conflict. And there are many lessons, military lessons that both India and Pakistan, I hope, are learning from this. And I hope that it's urging them to actually engage and have diplomatic relations, because what was clear to me from the India Pakistan crisis was that without talking to each other, threat perceptions become more dangerous, and misinformation, disinformation can really skew things. And if these leaders in India and Pakistan actually do want to protect their populations, they have to talk to each other. So at least I hope that's the lesson that they got out of it. But in terms of comparing Pakistan to Iran, I mean, what can I say, right? I mean, the Iranian military is very different from the Pakistani military. Iran's capabilities are very different from Pakistan's capabilities. Iran is a nuclear weapon state. Iran is not a nuclear weapon state yet. So, I mean, to draw these parodies, to me, it would be a good classroom exercise to see how this works out. This is happening in real time. And I have to say, when I see these kind of hot takes, I find them to be quite disappointing. And I'm waiting for the more serious analysts to come about and provide something that I can learn from.
Sahar Khan, so good to have you. I hope we do this again at
Thank
a
you so
time,
much.
again in real time. Thanks again for your
Thank
input.
you.
All right, that was Sahar Khan from Washington, D.C.